This is Henry Doktorsky reading my book, Killing for Krishna, The Danger of Deranged Devotion. Dedication. Sometimes I wonder why for so long I have continued my efforts to discover and share the hidden story about Kirtanananda Swami and New Vrindavan. It was, after all, some 16 years ago, 2002, when I first began researching the history of New Vrindavan and writing about my findings. One important reason why I have maintained my enthusiasm for studying New Vrindavan history is because Krishna, as I see it, so kindly gifted me the Keith Gordon Ham Swami Bhaktipad archive, tens of thousands of pages of New Vrindavan and ISKCON publications, trial transcripts, letters, confidential documents, and more for safekeeping. I believe there is a reason why the Keith Gordon Ham Swami Bhaktipad archive came under my protection. Should I be a miser and keep the inside story about New Vrindavan all to myself? Not at all. I consider it my sacred duty to share the classified information in this priceless, treasured trove of ISKCON history with others. During a private darshan, Bhaktipad once quoted to me Luke 12:48. Quote, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required," unquote. But perhaps the most important reason, as I see it, why I have developed a passion for uncovering the unadulterated history of New Vrindavan is because of the intensity of the love I once upon a time had for my spiritual master, and the devastation I experienced when I finally realized he was a cheater. When one loves someone very much and discovers that one's beloved is a cheater, the emotional trauma can be intense, deep-rooted, and long-lingering. In my case, discovering what actually happened at New Vrindavan has been therapeutic for me. It has helped to heal my heart. Some God brothers and sisters have told me that they have found my periodic articles about New Vrindavan history to be beneficial for them. As their long unanswered questions become answered, their understanding about what happened during a very important and formative time in their lives becomes more complete. And with more complete understanding, they can more easily and effectively heal and move on with their lives. In essence, this book, and other books which may follow, is about healing, not hurting, about mending, not breaking, about rejuvenating, not injuring. Not all may see it this way, but that is how I see it, and that is how some of my God brothers and sisters see it. Darkness cannot exist when there is light, and nescience cannot exist where there is knowledge. Quote, "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house." Unquote. Matthew 5:15. It doesn't hurt anyone to uncover dark, hidden secrets, except perhaps for those who want to keep the dark secrets hidden. Preface. Some readers may be aware that, during my spare time, I've been working on a book, a biography of my former ISKCON spiritual master, and a history of the New Vrindavan community, Gold, Guns, and God, Swami Bhaktipad, and the West Virginia Hare Krishnas. It's been quite a few years in the making, but I believe it will be finished and published soon. However, before that monumental work, containing about 108 chapters, is completed, I thought to write a shorter book about the murder of the New Vrindavan resident, the radical dissident Sulochan Das, Stephen Bryant. Writing about the murder of Sulochan was particularly difficult because so many eyewitnesses contradicted each other. Bhaktipad had one story, Tapapunj and Radhanath Swamis had another conflicting story, and Dharmatma and Janmashtami had yet another story. Who was speaking the truth and who was concealing the truth? About a decade ago, when I first was confronted by these apparently irreconcilable differences, I became discouraged and wrote, quote, I cannot, in most cases, ascertain whether my interviewees are, 1, speaking honestly, truthfully, and factually, or 2, attempting to cover up their own sins and crimes with sanitized versions of actual events. I am not a detective. I really don't have the time or inclination to spend the rest of my life trying to find out what really happened at New Vrindavan. I am tired of this never-ending process. Each new lead unearths a plethora of unbelievable atrocities, which in most cases I cannot positively confirm, as when I attempt to interview persons who were implicated in alleged activities, they either refuse to speak about it to me or deny such events ever occurred. And then some others become angry at me for repeating what I have heard, which defames the great souls who built the New Vrindavan community, and then they utter threats to me. Do I really need this? Unquote. While some God brothers encouraged me to continue my research, others attempted to discourage me. In a 2008 letter to the author, one God brother, a man serving life in prison for the brutal murder of 2 devotees, admonished me, quote, persons in your state of consciousness, lack of Krishna consciousness, would not be capable of understanding. This is simply a frank assessment of fact. For your sake, I just hope you don't continue with your attempt to publish your book. You can't see it, but you are riding toward oblivion on Vaishnav aparads, offenses to Vaishnavas. You have no standing in these matters, since you are no longer within the family of Vaishnavas. You'll gain nothing but pain and suffering in your life. Unquote. Although I was discouraged for a time, I did not give up my quest, and I thought, if I am patient, perhaps Krishna, the dispeller of darkness, will illuminate the truth. My patience has been rewarded. For recently, in November 2016, I had a breakthrough in this regard. The pieces of the puzzle fell together and the picture became clear and focused. With the arrival of these insights, the cloud of illusion had finally lifted, just as the damp New Vrindavan morning fog is burned away by the arrival of the sun. Years ago, Bhaktipad was fond of quoting Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, quote, though the mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind exceedingly small. Though with patience he stands waiting, with exactness grinds he all. Unquote. After more than 3 decades, it seems we have finally uncovered most of the facts and dispelled the persistent fictions regarding the conspiracy to murder Sulochana. I believe my recent analysis is sound, and now I offer these insights to the Vaishnava community at large and to any others who are interested to learn about the history of ISKCON and the New Vrindavan community and the danger of deranged devotion. One of my friends, after reading my manuscript, thought I wanted to see Radhanath in prison. That is not true at all. I have no personal animosity toward Radhanath, nor to anyone else who was involved in the plot to murder Sulochana. I have only fond memories of the times I spent with Radhanath, Janmastami, Kaladri, Dharmatma, Hayagriva, Tirtha, and Tapapunj during and after my 15 years as a resident of New Vrindavan. For example, when I first went to live at the Brahmachari ashram at the old Vrindavan farm in the summer of 1978, I used to take off work early to play harmonium and sing bhajans at the 6 p.m. arti. There was no bhakta program during those days, no gradual submersion into the daily life of a surrendered soul. The philosophy at New Vrindavan was sink or swim. At the old Vrindavan farm, Radhanath Das Brahmachari was the full-time pujari, and he was always friendly to me. I found him to be a renounced, simple, gentle, and soft-spoken devotee. He was also a bit sickly and was afflicted with painful boils from time to time, as I recall. I heard he took a vow at Kirtanananda Swami's instigation to never leave that place, to worship Radha Vrindavan Nath on that isolated hilltop in the Allegheny Plateau, surrounded by fields, forests, and grazing cows, and an occasional angry bull, where Srila Prabhupada first visited New Vrindavan in 1969 for the rest of his life. When Kirtanananda ordered him to become a sannyasi in 1982, Radhanath was beside himself. I remember the expression on his face, such suffering, such pain. He did not want to take sannyas. He did not think himself worthy, and he did everything in his power to get out of it. But finally, he accepted his fate. There's no doubt in my mind that of all the dozens and dozens of devotees Bhaktipad awarded with sannyas, Radhanath turned out to be the best of them all. Radhanath was always gentle and mild and averse to violence. One year, there was a big infestation of gluttonous groundhogs who were devouring everything in the garden. Kirtanananda couldn't spare a useful devotee to do groundhog guard duty, so he ordered Radhanath, Bhaktipad sometimes called him useless, to take a shotgun and sit in the garden, and if he saw a groundhog, to kill it. I heard that Radhanath sat in the garden all day like a scarecrow and saw many groundhogs, but he did not want to hurt them, so he fired the gun over their heads to scare them. Janmashtami has also been friendly toward me since the summer of 1979, when I taught music at the Nandagram school. When I first met him, he was carrying firewood into the school basement, and he went out of his way to point out the poison ivy so I would not get a rash. In the early 1980s, I used to visit Kaladri in his Bahulaban office sometimes when I was back from the pick. He was always on the phone, but he was also always friendly to me. Dharmatma was my traveling Sankirtan leader for 6 or 7 years, about 1980 to 1986. During that time, he never gave me any reason to doubt his integrity. During those days before the invention of cell phones, I counted on him to answer his landline phone at any hour of the day or night, in case I got separated from my partner, arrested, and needed to get bailed out of jail. Dharmama was always dependable. I trusted him. I did not get to know Hayagriva until 1989, when he was bedridden due to bone cancer. I was taught early on to avoid devotees who did not follow the principles strictly. But at that time, he lived at Bhaktipad's house, and whenever I visited Bhaktipad, several times a week, I would always spend time chatting with Hayagriva, who used to make me laugh with his humor, despite his painful condition. I became friendly with Tirtha Swami not until December 2002, when I first wrote to him in prison asking to hear his side of the story of Salochan's murder from my New Vrindavan history book manuscript. He replied, and we exchanged more than 200 letters from 2002 to 2017. I became his editor and helped him edit and publish 5 books which he wrote in prison, which were published by the New Vrindavan Prison Ministry. I created a website for him and served as his webmaster. I used to collect money from donors, mostly from Lokavarnatam Das, Lawrence Burstein, and purchase $400 to $700 worth of food for Tirtha, which I used to pack and ship to him every Christmas. Once a year, he was allowed to receive a food package in prison, and he greatly appreciated the dried soups, dried fruits, granola bars, rolled oats, herbal teas, ghee, honey, nuts, spices, and Maha Prasadam from New Vrindavan that I sent to him. I also have fond memory of Tapapunj Das Brahmachari taking me out in the parking lots of Ohio and teaching me how to distribute Prabhupada's books. I was never any good at it, but Tapapunj was always kind to me. Once in the autumn of 1979, after I had been arrested at a concert at the Richfield Coliseum, he bailed me out and asked me, what happened? I said a security guard stopped me and asked me if I was going to the concert. I said, no, I'm just here to distribute books. Then the security guard arrested me for trespassing. Tapapunj chastised me, quote, "You fool! You should have said that you were going to the concert. Then he would have simply told you to stop distributing books and you wouldn't have been arrested," unquote. I felt so bad, but the pained look on my face must have touched Tapapunja's heart, for then he encouraged me, quote, "That's all right. You are a Brahmin, and a Brahmin is always truthful, unquote. Tapapunj was correct in one regard. I like to speak the truth. I like to hear the truth. I do not like to be deceived. I do not like duplicity. I want to find out the truth when the truth is obscured. Perhaps that is why Radhanath Swami appears so prominently in certain sections of this book. The evidence implicates him without question in Salochan's murder, and yet he consistently denies it. But witnessing denial is not new to me. It is quite familiar. I saw exactly the same behavior 25 years ago when I confronted my spiritual master in October 1993 during a private darshan in his home and point-blank asked him if he had been having illicit sex with teenage boys. Bhaktipad told me that he had never broken any regulative principles since he met Prabhupada. I didn't believe him, and so I rejected him as my spiritual master. I knew he was lying because I had done my homework. I had conducted my own investigation. I had talked to some of the new Vrindavan boys and read their testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. As far as I was concerned, Bhaktipad was no guru. He was a show bottle pretender. Although he did not admit his fault, it was nonetheless important for me to confront him, so I could more easily sever my sentimental attachment to him and become free from his influence. I suppose, in one sense, I feel a kinship with Salochan. He could not stand hypocrisy, and he fought against it. I feel the same way. When I detect hypocrisy in a so-called spiritual leader, my natural response is to investigate the evidence and, if needed, challenge the hypocrisy. I did it 25 years ago, and I will do it again if I think it is important. Similarly, I don't expect Radhanath Swami to change his story and admit participating in the murder plot, regardless of the evidence against him, any more than I expected Bhaktipad to admit his vices when I confronted him. In this regard, at least, Radhanath and Bhaktipad are birds of the same feather. However, if others want to follow Radhanath, to worship and adore and serve and give their lives to him, that's fine with me. I truly wish him and his followers well. All glories! But I sometimes wonder. Prabhupada said, quote, "A qualified Brahmin is always truthful," unquote. Krishna book, chapter 52. Can a person who distorts the truth be considered a Brahmin? And why does a person not speak the truth? Could it be because of fear? Could such a person be fearful of others discovering the truth? Could such a person be afraid of inflicting yet another scandal to Prabhupada's movement, of disappointing thousands of sincere disciples and losing prestige and position as a great, humble, and saintly ISKCON spiritual master? If dishonesty is due to fear, I wonder, can such a person even be considered a sannyasi? Prabhupada says, quote, "A sannyasi must be fearless," unquote. Srimad Bhagavatam 225 purport. About 15 years ago, on September 14th, 2003, I spoke with a godbrother, Bhaktipad's former chauffeur and director of New Vrindavan Purchasing, Priyavrata, Frankie Lyons, in a Chinese restaurant in Wheeling, West Virginia. Although he was not personally involved in the plot to murder Salochan, he was a witness to important conversations among senior New Vrindavan leaders regarding the murder plot. He told me, quote, "Every time I visit New Vrindavan and Radhanath is there, he avoids me. He doesn't even look me in the eye. I think it's because he knows that I know he was involved in the murder plot, and when he sees me, he becomes fearful that I might say something. It seems to me he becomes afflicted with great anxiety," unquote. Interestingly enough, after I discovered, by reading the trial transcripts and speaking with other devotees who had witnessed important conversations, that Radhanath had indeed been involved in the murder of Salochan, it seemed that he also began avoiding me whenever I visited New Vrindavan and tried to speak with him. I remembered my godbrother's remarks some years earlier about fear and the anxiety it produces. In my opinion, if a person, even a saintly person, has deep-rooted fears which interfere with his mental composure, peace, and happiness, and results in anxiety, that person's well-wishers and friends should attempt to expose the root cause of that fear and help their friend acknowledge the root cause, honestly deal with it, and thereby conquer his fear. That is what a true friend would do. Not let a friend continue to deny the root cause of the fear and live the rest of his life in anxiety. Blowing on a boil cannot remove the pus inside. It must be lanced with a sharp knife. In this regard, I consider myself to be Radhanath Swami's friend, perhaps his best friend. Who among his close associates or disciples would dare to bring up in conversation or by letter such a disturbing and verboten topic? Maybe Radhanath will thank me someday for researching, writing, and publishing this book, if it helps him to acknowledge and conquer his fear, admit the truth, and become an honest disciple of Srila Prabhupada. One of my Vaishnava friends, a Prabhupada disciple who remembers those times 30 years ago when fanaticism and violence ruled ISKCON, reminded me, quote, "It's good you are discovering all this information and sharing it with others, but be forewarned, you may need to watch your head. Have you been a little worried about the possible repercussions? Perhaps you should be," unquote. I responded, "I believe those days of fanaticism and violence are long gone." I hope I'm right.